It seems as though the SEC will not move on from an 8-game conference schedule, Joe. So we're a couple weeks removed from the ACC conference spring meetings
Oh, don't you
in
disappoint me right now, sir. Do
in
not
Amelia
disappoint me
Island.
right now.
The SEC meetings are in Destin, Florida. They start up today, and Greg Sankey has already done some media availability to the commissioner. And the big topic of conversation, beyond what to do with field stormings and field goal posts coming down, is 8 or 9 games as they get ready to go to a 16-team conference model. A lot of coaches, a lot of ADs want to stay at 8, but there's a television aspect to this, Joe,
Oh,
that people keep hammering the table on. And there's this weird game of chicken taking place between the SEC and ESPN because it's not in the contract. My understanding is, based on Ross Dellinger's reporting and Andy Staples' reporting, it's not in the contract that ESPN has to give the SEC more money if they go to a 9-game conference slate. So there are some ADs that would prefer easy home buys, a scheduled win so they can get to their bowl eligibility quicker. So this is what's going to take place across the SEC meetings this week. It's an interesting debate, to say the least.
yeah. Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, who added Texas and Oklahoma to get more inventory and bigger names in his conference to prepare for the 12-team format. Let's not forget.
Mm-hmm.
And negotiated a deal with ESPN, solely ESPN, no longer with CBS, that is going to make them a significant amount more money than they were making before. And they already were making a lot of money, remember?
Yeah, they were making a ton of money.
Greg Sankey is saying, oh, I'm leaving this up to Greg Sankey has big parent energy right now.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to let you decide what's the right thing to do. I'm not saying that you can't have your way. I'm just saying I'm going to let you get together in a room and you come up with the best solution for this. I'm just saying, during the pandemic, like when we actually needed the money and everything and tried to keep our lights on and we only played SEC games. Remember how cool that was? Remember how happy our television partners were that we weren't playing East Bemidji State? Remember how happy that we didn't have to see Alabama versus the Citadel? They were ecstatic. So guess what? We're getting all this money from this entity. Guess what we're going to do? Dance, monkey. Dance, little monkey. That's what you need to do right now. Get those little symbols out and start dancing. This makes you no different than the Big Ten. This makes you no different than the ACC. Yeah. I just loved his quotes about, well, our fans, they really enjoyed the pandemic. To the games they couldn't go to, Greg, where we weren't playing these games that weren't of the quality of our conference opponents. And it was like, yeah. And my favorite part was we ran, what did he say? Advanced analytics, I think he said. We ran advanced analytics that showed that your bowl eligibility numbers, they would not be affected significantly. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, how is he going to sell this to a group that doesn't want to do it other than to say that's what the money's for?
Exactly. That's exactly it. But that's not what the money is for, Joe. This is from Brett McMurphy. He put this quote out there from SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. Money follows. It doesn't lead. When all you do is chase money, you make a lot of bad decisions. Now, this is when I just found out that Greg Sankey's got some sort of beef with Maryland. Because why is Maryland going to take a strain like this, guys? Like, man, what did they ever do to you? Because that exactly is a bad decision when you go chase the money. But that's exactly what this is about. It's all about the money. It's always been about the money. You talk to anybody within college athletics, and Greg Sankey has some of the biggest gopher, like, oh, what did you say? He is tuned into what other conferences are doing. They're tuned into being the leaders in all of college athletics. And if that comes down to how much money you make, well, then it absolutely matters to Greg Sankey. Let's not forget that you go back to pandemic rules when the ACC had technically two teams make the college football playoff because Notre Dame was technically a member of the ACC. I'm not making this up. They were legitimately upset. Greg Sankey was legitimately mad that the ACC now had a claim to something that the SEC had been using as a talking point for a couple of years. And this is going to be the same thing going forward for the college football playoff. So let's let's go from there, Joe, because that's what this is really about. There's this idea that let's take the money out of it, because you know that better conference games, more conference games means more inventory for the SEC network and ESPN, higher ratings, which then elevates the level of the package. This is no different from the ACC finally getting with the program and scrapping divisions, because what was that ultimately about? The ACC was trying to get better inventory for ESPN, better inventory for their own network. And you don't do that by having the same games within your conference, and you get less of NC State, Duke, you get less of Clemson, Virginia Tech, and the like. So you're telling me that the SEC doesn't look at this from the perspective of, oh, we can do Texas A&M and Texas more often now? Yes, that's what we want in terms of ratings. So the money will follow. In a way, I kind of agree with what Greg Sankey's saying. You go to 9 games, the money will eventually follow. The concern isn't about bowl eligibility. The concern seems to be coming from the college football playoff and whether or not a 3-loss SEC team can make the expanded field. So that's where I think things get a little tricky. There's a fear that by going to 9 conference games, you're basically inviting another loss, and that loss is going to keep you out of an expanded playoff field if you're Texas or Oklahoma or a fringe SEC team. I don't necessarily buy that, but that seems to be the argument that's taking place right now.
Well, don't forget, by adding Texas and Oklahoma too, they need to change their schedule model. Otherwise, the teams in the East will never play them unless you're a partner. And that's how they're set up right now, where they go long stretches where teams who are not together like don't ever play. Like kind of like the NC State Duke deal under the old Atlantic and Coastal setup. And you can't add commodities like Texas and Oklahoma and then have Georgia be like, okay, well, we'll see you in 2033 and then again in 2042. Right. How does that sound?
Yeah, that's not good.
So they got to jumble up their schedule the same way that the ACC just did. The question is going to be, are they going to go to the 9th or not? It's an interesting misstep by the SEC if the reporting is true, that contractually they don't get more money out of a 9th game. Now, contractually they do get more money by adding Texas and Oklahoma.
Yes.
So maybe there's a potato talking point there for Sankey in how that's going. But ultimately, why does this matter? You might be asking me, an NC State or a Carolina or even a Duke fan. This is why. A lot of the games, especially NC State, they've got a lot of games lined up with SEC opponents, South Carolina, Georgia, 2 in particular. Those games won't happen if you get to a 9th game. And the SEC had already put that in the language of the contracts with NC State that says if they go to 9, if the SEC schedule is expanded to 9 games, they can cancel this game without financial penalty. So this is obviously something they've been thinking about, planning for. And I think ultimately you're going to see more SEC football because, of course, it just means more.